Genetically modified foods are foods derived from organisms whose genetic material, DNA, has been modified in a way that does not occur naturally, through the introduction of a gene from a different organism. Currently available GM foods stem mostly from plants, but in the future, foods derived from GM microorganisms or GM animals are likely to be introduced on the market. Most existing genetically modified crops have been developed to improve yield through the introduction of resistance to plant diseases or of increased tolerance of herbicides.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, Cuba suddenly found itself with 60% lower pesticide and 77% lower fertilizer imports and 50% less petroleum available for agriculture. There was also a drop in food imports by more than 50%. In response to the looming food shortage crisis, as their agriculture was mostly based on large-scale, capital-intensive monoculture farming systems that were heavily reliant on synthetic pesticides and fertilizers derived from petroleum and on petroleum itself. The Cuban government launched a national effort to convert the nation's modern conventional farming system into an organic one that was low input and essentially self-reliant. Pesticides and herbicides were replaced by pest, pathogen, and weed control methods that also made use of biopesticides, such as various bacterial and fungal diseases agents the Cubans developed. Plant-like pesticides like neem, natural enemies, such as various parasitic and predatory insects, intercropping and crop rotations, and the contributions to weed control made by farm animals. Synthetic fertilizers were replaced by biofertilizers, including ribosome incubants for legumes, free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and mycorrhizal fungi, earthworms, compost, animal and green manures, and the integration of grazing animals. There was also a return to animal traction in place of tractors, because the unavailability of fuel, tires, and spare parts. Woodlands surrounding farm fields were encouraged, and they produced not only food products, lumber, fuel wood, fruits, nuts, and honey, but also habitat for insect-eating and pollinating birds, insects, and bats. Farms were converted from large, specialized enterprises with one or at most only a few products to a mixed farming system producing fruits, vegetables, grains, livestock, and fish. The resulting diversification created a mosaic of land use that served to help buffer against both extreme weather events and infectious diseases in livestock and crops. In 1993, Cuba greatly reduced the state of all farm infrastructure, turning farms into cooperatives, a form of worker-owned enterprises, and encouraged the return of urban populations to the countryside. Farmers' markets were also reopened. By mid-1995, the food shortage had been overcome, and in 1997, growing season in Cuba recorded its highest ever production levels for 10 of the most 13 basic food items in the Cuban diet. Production came primarily from small farms, and in the case of eggs and pork, from booming backyard production. The proliferation of urban farmers who produce fresh produce has been vitally important to the Cuban food supply, with more than 30,000 hectares, around 74,000 acres, in cities devoted to agriculture, producing more than 3 million tons of fresh vegetables every year for some 11 million people. More than 50,000 tons of food were produced annually during the late 1990s in the city of Havana alone. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, Cuba suddenly found itself with 60% lower pesticide and 77% lower fertilizer import.
He warns that such ingestion of GMO foods and regular exposure
Most Americans have not formed an opinion on GMOs as they do not have enough information regarding it.
My opinion on GMOs, genetically modified, what is it?
Organisms.
I guess I need more information before I can make an educated guess. My gut is that I don't really know what's going into is it foods?
Yep.
Yeah, into the foods that are being processed with those. So I'd like to see warning labels maybe on items that growing that way.
That's good. Some people feel strongly about banning GMOs because of the chemical input.
Although the FDA has delegated GMOs as safe to the community and whatnot, I do not entirely agree with the idea of putting chemicals into our food and consuming them. As Americans, we are already highly inclined to put chemicals into our body. We do not need another reason to do so.
Other Americans feel that because the FDA has approved of GMOs, that they should be consumable.
The food service program at Eastview High School is run by our district, who is under the strict supervision of the Department of Health, the state of Minnesota. And everything that they have included is deemed healthy by the state of Minnesota. In a perfect world, we would have all of our food that would come to us as, what's my term, without any type of hormones. I'm looking for my term. I'm lost.
Genetically modified.
There we go. Without any type of genetically modified. Although the Food and Drug Administration has not defined genetically modified foods as something that is harmful or unhealthy.